Let's take a Bible, turn over to the book of Genesis, and we will be here throughout the evening somewhere around Genesis and maybe a verse or two elsewhere, but I hope you'll find a Bible. And let's get very comfortable with our Bibles. Get where you read it and you know where things are in it. Make it your book and make it something that is very, very familiar to you and make it a part of your life. Genesis chapter 15. We're just kind of in the groundwork of a short series on the nation of Israel. A few months ago, we talked about the altars, and then the temple, the altar, the tabernacle, the temple, and then the body being the temple of the Holy Ghost. And we talked about God's meeting with men and God's meeting with women, how we are His temple. And now we're talking about the land. God picks things, and God does unique things. And we're talking about the literal land, that piece of dirt. And I don't know if you guys can look on the computer, because you're not going to listen to me much anyway. But there's a map, a picture we showed last week that has the Persian Gulf, Iran, down to Egypt. It's just a line drawing. And then there's another one where California has Israel in the middle of it. If we had those two, if you can find them, we could use both of those in a couple of minutes. But talking about Israel, let's start with Genesis chapter 15. And basically tonight, we're talking about who owns that land. And if you are of Middle Eastern descent, I'm not picking on anybody. I have no prejudice in my heart, because I can't tell somebody from Malaysia from somebody from the Philippines, right? Brother, Miss Betty caught it. Are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? I just think we're all in the family and it's all good. And I certainly couldn't tell somebody from Egypt from somebody in Saudi Arabia. We're just looking at reality here and countries and what God says. And so Genesis chapter 15, we're going to start there about the promise. God made some promises, and God always keeps His word. Look at Genesis 15 and look down at verse 18. It says, Genesis 15:18, in the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. Remember, his name was later changed to Abraham, but Abram right now, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaims, the Amorites, and if you notice the Canaanites, you'll see that many of these names are repeated over and over, but especially the Canaanite, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So he lists in verse 19, 20, and 21, Abraham, long before, 400 plus years before anything happens with the nation of Israel as a people, God has already promised them this land. And if you notice in verse 18, you have that picture with the line drawing. Let's look at that whole picture. And I should have brought I was going to say a taser. I should have brought a laser. But I should not bring a taser. I might use it. But over there in the right center, you see Ur. You see where Ur is. There's the Persian Gulf. That's water. And Mesopotamia. This would be a map covering some of the Old Testament cities and things, not modern. And Ur and Babylon, that area, that would be where Kuwait and Iraq and Iran and all those things are on that side. Saudi Arabia in the middle, Israel over the left. Up to the top, you see the arrow going to Haran. When Abraham left Ur, when God directed him to leave, he went to Haran, stayed there a while. His father died. Sarah's brother stayed there, going down into Shechem, Bethel, Ai, those cities. That would be where those black squares are. That would be modern day Israel. And then down into Egypt to the left. So if you want to look at that verse we just read, at the end of verse 18, leave the lights where they are if you want. I'll read it. Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. So the river of Egypt. And I'm not going to differ with anybody. It doesn't matter to me. But you got the Nile River. And then you've got the Red Sea's forks going up in there. They're not going to call the Red Sea a river, but if they did, somewhere down there in Egypt, all the way over to the Euphrates, that's what God gave Israel. So before we go anywhere else, we can just settle this. That's all Israel's. The whole thing belongs to Israel. And there's no debating that. And there is some debate who Israel is, which is kind of funny to me. But those things were given. So you can leave that up there, but get a few lights on for people. Look over to Genesis chapter 17. Now remember, Abraham had a son from Hagar, a handmaid he picked up down in Egypt, and that son's name was Ishmael. All right, so his firstborn was Ishmael, half Egyptian, half Mesopotamian. Abraham was the father of the Jewish nation. The Hebrew, they called him, but he was from Ur, or Mesopotamia, came over to the land of Canaan, and his firstborn was Ishmael. And then he and Sarah, 12 years or so later, had who? All right, second child was Isaac. So Abraham has two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. So look with me then at chapter 17 and verse 19. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. Now stopping just for a minute, what Abraham is getting promised from God was something that would go from Abraham to Isaac. There is already a 12-year-old firstborn named Ishmael. He's not in this covenant. He has nothing to do. There's no covenant relationship there. God had said to Abraham, you and your wife Sarah are going to have a baby, and Abraham had said, oh, I'm pretty old. Let Ishmael be blessed, God. And so God says, well, all right, I can bless Ishmael, but Isaac, he's the one I'm going to be in a covenant with. And so that's what we just read. Look at the next verse, verse 20. As for Ishmael, I have heard thee, behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. Now it's interesting. How many kids, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, how many boys did Jacob have? 12. And then here Ishmael's got how many? 12. You want to know the significance of that? Go figure it out. I have no idea. But it is just interesting. Now, if you notice things like that, then down the road you read something, you think, oh, that goes with this. That's comparing spiritual things to spiritual. Don't look at a lexicon. Don't read a concordance or read a commentary. Just read your Bible a lot, and you'll get a lot more just reading it and asking God to teach you. But anyway, and if you will maybe do some numerology one day or something. But anyhow, verse 21, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at a set time this next year. So God settled this thing. First of all, Abraham is going to get this land, all that land in between the giant bodies of water, and then he's going to have these children and grandchildren, and then Ishmael, he's going to have his own land and all, but he's not a part of this covenant relationship. Go back to chapter 12, just a few pages back. Now, one of the common things today, if you look at a map of the Middle East, depending on who makes the map, but many maps today don't even have Israel on it. They have Palestine on it. And I just, for curiosity's sake, today Googled a map of Palestine. And it was, I don't know, if you have a map of Israel there that's real distinct, pop it up some point. You may not have one, but it was the map of Israel, and it was marked Palestine. Now, just so you understand, there's no Palestine. This area right there along the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea, it was marked Palestine. And that is not at all. It's Israel. All right. Now, just a quick, off the top of my head, history lesson, because it's very minimal, because it's off the top of my head. In 70 A.D., Rome came in and destroyed Jerusalem. And remember Jesus prophesied not one stone will be left upon another. The Temple Mount the whole temple would be destroyed. And that happened. And then about 50 years later, 135 or somewhere in there, and help me if you're in the foyer, I'm hearing people talk. If I'm hearing people talk, no one in the foyer is listening except to you. So if you'd help me, if you want to talk, you can go outside, but don't be a distraction to folks that are here at church, okay? Unless I'm hearing my own voice echoing through the TV monitors, and I apologize. But we're here at church for the church service, all right? If you want to fellowship, go down to Denny's, and it's so slow you can fellowship a long time at Denny's. Not any shame, just know what you're getting. But anyhow, so about 135, the Emperor of Rome, and I'm blanking on his name here now, but the Jewish people is a very significant thing. He was building right on the temple site a temple to himself. And he declared himself a god. He's going to have this big, beautiful temple made to himself, and the Jews just flipped. And they tend to be a pretty emotional people. And, Miriam dancing as Pharaoh's armies are drowning, and she just thought that was awesome. That's a girl who'd watch cutthroat movies with her husband. But anyway, so he builds this thing, and the Jews go crazy, and they fight against it and cause all kinds of trouble. Rome brings in a bunch more soldiers, and there's like 200,000 Jews die in that time. And they bring the Jews back into submission, and a very tragic thing. Tens of thousands of Jews put into slavery, and just a horrible time. The emperor was so mad at the Jews that if you look at this map, maybe flip these front lights off. If you go down to the bottom left corner where it says Rafah and Gaza, Gaza is an Old Testament town. Gaza, Ashkelon, Ekron, those were remember the 5 lords of the Philistines, and the Ark of the Covenant was brought down there, and they had all kinds of trouble down there. And so that's the Philistine cities. Well, that area down there, the arch rivals, enemies of the Jewish people down there, and that is, by the way, where the Gaza Strip is. If you hear people talk today about the Gaza Strip, it's a little tiny strip of land below Joppa, right along the Mediterranean Sea, where the town of Gaza is. And so, but those were Old Testament Philistines. Remember, that was what the big guy, Goliath, was, the Philistine. So this guy, again, 135, 150, so after the crucifixion, he takes some of these people, and he knows they're enemies, so he declares Jerusalem their town. No one ever lives there. There's never any Philistine occupation. And again, depending on whose history you read, this changes a lot. But the Roman, like a translation or a transliteration for Philistine, was the Palestinian. And that's where the term Palestinian came. There's never been a Palestinian people. No one comes from Palestinian descent. There's not a Palestinian capital city. This is Israel. It's the country God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it's not a story on Palestinians, but if you wonder why all that fits in there, that's a very blurred history and not a lot of details, because I wasn't prepared to teach on it. But so back over to Genesis 12, you flip the lights back on. And Abraham, chapter 12, verse 5, Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. On the big map, that was way up at the top. And they went forth to go into the land of what? Canaan. And into the land of Canaan they came. You're going to see Canaan pop up over and over and over again. If you go over to chapter 25, Genesis 25. So this land is called Canaan, where the first reference we have of this land, there may be more ancient names, but the one scripturally we're going to look at here is Canaan. Genesis 25 and down at verse 5. And Abraham, Genesis 25, 5, Abraham gave all that he had to who? Isaac. So we got 2 sons of Abraham. One is Isaac, one is Ishmael. And Ishmael didn't get any of this stuff. Now, Ishmael's wealthy, and Ishmael goes off, and you'll see it later on if you read Ishmael. And by the way, Ishmael's the wild man, and there's some things about him prophetically, but that's about his family in the years to come. You don't really read it where Ishmael's much of a bad guy, and there's some difficulties, but he wasn't tearing up anything, and he was pretty much a good guy. Now, Jacob, if we want to go historically, just real quick, because we're jumping through time, we've got Abraham, comes to the land of Canaan, and Isaac, he gets Hagar down in Egypt, comes back, and there Isaac, Hagar gives birth to Ishmael, and then Isaac is born to Sarah. And then remember Sarah, they didn't want Isaac to have a wife locally, so they went back up. But go back to that big map, Bob, since you're, or Don, whoever, up there at the top where it says Haran. That's where Sarah's family lived. So they went ahead and sent one of the servants. Remember the Abraham's servant, we've taught that before. Abraham's servant went up. Abraham sent him to go to Haran to bring a wife back for Isaac. And he brings the wife back, and so that was Rebekah. So now you've got Abraham and Sarah, then you've got Isaac and Rebekah. And Rebekah gives birth to Abraham, Isaac, to who? Jacob and Esau. Remember, Jacob's the one who was the kind of the homebody, the cooking the beans. Esau was the hunter, the outdoorsman kind of guy. And Esau was the firstborn. And sometimes people in the Middle East will say, well, the inheritance was to Ishmael, not to Isaac. Well, then if you finally fuss enough and you prove that it was Isaac who got the inheritance, then they'll say, well, yes, but Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. And Esau was the firstborn, so we deserve the whole land of Canaan or Israel or Palestine, whatever they're calling it, because of Esau. But if you remember, well, we'll look at it in a minute here, that doesn't cut it either, because it doesn't work that way. So, I'm sorry, where are we? So we've got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob's got these 12 sons. Jacob, one of the second born of the twins, he goes up to Haran, picks up a wife and another wife. And then he's not very bright, so he gets another wife and then another wife. And so he's got 4 wives. He ends up with 11 boys and a girl, comes down, another boy's born, Benjamin, finally at the end. So he's got his 12 boys. They come back down to the land of Canaan. And which one was hated? Joseph. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Which one of the 12 sons is hated and sold? Joseph. He's sold down into Egypt. And through a horrible injustice, he saves everybody. And we've got to keep God involved in our world, even in our world of injustice. We've got a great God. God is very capable. And so Joseph's down there, and the whole family comes down. They're down in Egypt 400 years, and they come back up to the land of Canaan. Moses leads them. If you look down there where it says Negev desert, Moses leads the people of Israel out of Egypt. They go up to Kadesh Barnea, maybe about where that 7 is, somewhere there. And 10 were bad, 2 were good. They go down, they wander in that desert for 40 years. Then they come around the backside of the Jordan River, where that word Ai and Bethel are. And that's where Moses dies, and they go into the land of Canaan. We're talking about 1,000 years passing. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, the 400 or so years, depending on where we're starting and stopping. Joseph dies. Moses is born. Moses is 80 years old. They bring them all out. That's a lot of years have gone on. And God hasn't changed his mind one thing about that promise to Abraham. And could I assure you, God hasn't changed his mind about any promises to you. He loves you. He cares about you. He'll help you. He'll walk with you through the good and the bad. And he's a faithful God. And we can trust him. He's a God worthy of all that. And so now we're in the book of Exodus. Flip over there to Exodus chapter 33 with me. Exodus chapter 33. Remember, the land is called the land of Canaan because there were a bunch of Canaanites there. Or they were called Canaanites because they lived in the land of Canaan. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Doesn't matter a whole lot, but because they're all gone now. But Exodus 33, the Lord said, Exodus chapter 33, verse 2, but let's go back to verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, depart and go up thence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt into the land which I swear to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, unto thy seed will I give it. And I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the who? The Canaanite, not the Who. That's a singing group from a long time ago that only people like me and Brother Servine would remember. The Canaanite and the Amorite and the Hittite, the Perizzite. So the land of, go back to our Israel map there, Bob. The land of Israel is still called Canaan. They're not in there yet. That's the land of the Canaanites. They're still there. Go to chapter 34. Chapter 34, verse 11. Observe, chapter 34, verse 11, observe that which I command thee this day, behold, I drive out before thee the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Hittite, all these people. But the nation took the name of the Canaanites, so that land there, if we were to follow maps according to eras, that would be marked Canaan during this time. Now, Joshua's on the east side of the Jordan River, and he's ready to walk into Jericho, and now we're about to see the promised land. We'll come back to this in a minute. This place becomes, at this point, it takes the name of the promised land. Now, why would it be called the promised land? Deep intellectual question. It was promised way back here to Abraham. It was promised, and God didn't break his promises. And though that land was called the land of Canaan, or the Canaanites, it was promised to decide, but now they're going in to get that promised land. And we'll go on a little bit further. If you want to look over to Deuteronomy chapter 3, or Deuteronomy chapter 9, we'll just look at a couple of others. And we're going to go on in the next couple of weeks just reading. It's interesting what God has done with the nation of Israel. If some of you are old enough to remember the 6-Day War, 1967, I was 10 years old, and I don't really know anything about it, but read about it. But some of you were there, or you were plenty old, but few young people, Israel became a nation in what year? Officially, 1948. And so they've been in existence in the eyes of God all these years. But in 1948, they became an officially recognized nation. And so from 1948 to 1967, we're only looking at 19 years. So we've got a 19-year-old country. And if you were to go on a larger map of the Muslim nations around them, from Saudi Arabia and Egypt, the main Muslim nations, they outland mass Israel like 20-1. Population was great, all the things, they were just sitting ducks in the middle, and all these Muslim nations had decided, we are going to eliminate Israel from the face of the earth. And so since it became very obvious they're going to do it, Israel decided, we'll go first. And so they just whooped the fire out of these guys. And in less than a week, it was done. And everybody's whining and crying, and these mean people and these aggressive, hateful Jews. It's just amazing. It's like the liberals today crying because somebody's investigating them. Just a bunch of whiners. And Israel just whooped the fire out of, God, we'll talk about some of the things. Where was Israel in World War I and World War II, and then when they became a nation. Look, there's no matter what you want to do, they're awesome. Now, if you've been there, they're crazy. They're so nuts. But God is blessing that place. And by the way, not because of them, he's blessing them because of him. Because God is so incredible, and he chose that place. Hopefully you're in Deuteronomy 9 by now, otherwise I'm going to read anyway. Deuteronomy 9:23. So God brought these former slaves, we'll call them, to the east side of the Jordan River, gave them the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 9, verse 3. Understand therefore this day that the Lord thy God is he which doth go over before thee as a consuming fire. He shall destroy them. He shall bring them down before thy face. So shalt thou drive them out and destroy them quickly, as the Lord hath said to thee. Speak not. So God's going to do the work. They just needed to be faithful and be obedient, which, by the way, is all we have to do. Verse 4, speak thou not in thine heart, after that the Lord thy God hath cast them out from before thee, saying, for my righteousness the Lord hath brought me to possess this land. But for the wickedness of these nations, the Lord doth drive them out before thee, not for thy righteousness. Remember repetition. When you see things repeated, pay attention. Not for thy righteousness, nor for the uprightness of their heart dost thou go to possess the land, but for the wickedness of these nations. He says twice, it's not about you. Go on and look at verse 6. Understand therefore the Lord thy God giveth thee not this good land to possess for thy righteousness, for thou art a stiff-necked people. 3 times he says, it's not you, it's not you, it's not you. Mark this thing down. Don't you get proud. And one of the saddest things that happens in America is God miraculously raises up a nation and we say, we don't need God. I'll tell you, we wouldn't be here without God. We'd have none of this without God. And we're crazy. And that's what God was warning them. Don't you do that. Don't you go that way. But he's bringing them from that where Mount Nebo is, Mount Pisgah in that area where Moses died. He saw the promised land. Joshua goes across with the Israelites to Jericho, begins to conquer the land. And now the land belonged to Abraham and his seed all the way back here. But it's a long time before they start really getting to raise their families. Now, Abraham's family was there, Isaac's family was there, Jacob's family was there. Then they go down to Egypt, 400 years down in Egypt. They finally get back up here many, many years later, and they're coming in, and it's called the time of the Canaanite, or the Amorite. God's giving the people that live in that land a chance to repent, but instead they ruin things. And God said, I'm done with you. I've given you all the chances I can, and I hope you pray for your country. We want God's mercy. We don't want ruin. And we definitely need God and his help and his mercy. Young people especially, let me encourage you, pray for your country. Pray that we'll turn. We, in this room, will seek God and walk with God. Pray that our nation would turn to him. Genesis 36. I'm sorry, stop. One verse I missed. Right where you were in Deuteronomy 9, because you won't be able to find Deuteronomy again. Look at the end of verse 5. I missed one point at the end of verse 5. And that he may perform the word which the Lord swear to thy fathers, Abraham, Ishmael. Oh, no, it doesn't say Ishmael, does it? It says Isaac, and it doesn't say Esau. It says Jacob. So here we are in the book of Deuteronomy. And if this is a little boring for you, hang on. It'll get a little bit funner in the next couple weeks. Here we are way up here in the book of Deuteronomy, right before they enter into the land of Canaan. Hundreds of years after the promise to Abraham, God says, let's mark this thing down. Just want you to remember, all this that's about to happen, I'm going to lead you into the land of Canaan. I'm going to give you this land, and your job is to remember it's me that gave it to you as I promised. And you and I can rest in the promises of God. We can trust him. He's a wonderful God, and we should relax. Let's go back to Genesis 36 quickly here. Genesis chapter 36. And we'll look at Ishmael just for a moment. Ishmael, so we got Abraham, and his two boys were who? Isaac and Ishmael. And then we've got Isaac's sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau, picture this, all right? So you've got Abraham, you got Isaac and Ishmael, and then you've got Isaac's sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau married Ishmael's daughter. I think that would be his first cousin. I'm not sure. But anyway, that's what all the Ishmaelites have, are the Esauites. Edomites, they all have ears turned sideways and they're cross-eyed. But anyway, I'm joking. I'm totally joking, all right. Genesis 36, look at verse 2. Esau took his wives and the daughters of Canaan. So Esau married a what? Canaanite. All right, simple enough. Not a big deal. And he goes through naming who these people are. But look at verse 3. And Bethshemath. So he's got several wives he marries, but this one, Bethshemath, was Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebajoth. All right, so just a thought. He married into the Canaanite family. And if we read on, he then moves. Well, let's look over a little bit further. Let's go to chapter 36, verse 6. And Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all the persons of his house and his cattle and his beasts and all his substance, because he had got in the land of Canaan. So where did he get all of his stuff? In Canaan. Now look on here. And he went into the country from the face of his brother Jacob. Verse 7. For their riches were more than they might dwell together, and the land wherein they were strangers could not bear them, because their cattle. Thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir, which Esau is Edom. And Edom would be on the east side where it says Mount Nebo, and down there, which would be modern day Jordan. Nile and Lubna that they come to the Arabic class. They're from Jordan. And so Jordan would be our Old Testament Edom. And so Ishmael's kids and Esau's family, they're all over there. They're not even living in the land of Canaan. I don't know if it makes any difference to anybody. But anyway, let's go on. Who is the God that takes care of these things? Romans chapter 9, if you want to write it down, it says this, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. God chose Jacob. And if you want to get into a discussion on the ethics of God saying, I love this guy and I hate this guy, you can do it all you want. I'm just going to read it and believe it. But God makes a distinction here. Esau went off to Edom to the east, and Jacob and his family, the 12 tribes, stayed in the land of Canaan. That has been Abraham's land, Isaac's land, Jacob's land, the Jewish people's land, the Hebrews' land, ever since it's their land. In Genesis chapter 50, just for the sake of time, trust me, you can write the reference down. Genesis 50, verse 24, as Joseph was dying, Genesis 50, verse 24, and I'll just read it to make sure I'm going to quote it right. But Genesis chapter 50, verse 24, and Joseph said to his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And over and over and over, he says, this land is the land that God swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then later on, again, with Moses, he says, I'm going to send you to the land of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And then to the slaves in Egypt, you're going to be delivered. You're going to go to the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, quickly, the land we're looking at there was called Canaan because of who? Canaanites. And then it became called the Promised Land because it was given by, and who was it promised to? Abraham, and then to his seed, and eventually, and Israel, if you're newer, Abraham, his son Isaac, his son Jacob. The word Jacob means trickster, a sneak, a crook. And but through a long series of difficulties in life, isn't it great? God can turn a life around. Boy, the story of Jacob's a wonderful story. And that trickster, that sneak, turned it around, and his name was changed to Israel. Israel means a prince. And what a wonderful thing. Don't give up on people. So it became the Promised Land. And then they come in there, they conquer the land, and they set up their 12 tribes. The book of Joshua describes where each one of those tribes are. There's 2.5 tribes up where that flower is. I have no idea what that flower is there for. But Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh are up there. And then half of Manasseh is on the other side of the river. Levi didn't get any property, but because of Joseph being so faithful, both his kids, Manasseh and Ephraim, get it. So anyway, you end up with 12 tribes plus Levi. Don't worry about it. If you find 13 tribes and you get confused, don't worry, just relax. It's okay. But it's all divided up in about Joshua chapter 7 and following from there. Look over to Joel chapter 2 with me. And while you're finding the book of Joel, because it's going to take a half hour, Psalms, and then you have the big books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. There's Lamentations in there and some things. But to see if you can find the book of Joel. Hosea, Daniel, Hosea, and then Joel. And if you find Joel chapter 3, and just hang on to that. Now, I don't have a way to point here, but if you hear of the Gaza Strip, I mentioned already, that's down there where that place, why don't you flip this front light off, where it says Gaza. It's a very narrow strip along the Mediterranean Sea. And then up in the center area of this whole, if I could get my I don't need lights. I've got all this stuff. In the center area where it says Mount Ebal and Shechem, that whole area there would be called the West Bank. And I'm just thinking of news, things that you hear in the news. And it would be the West Bank of the Jordan River. And picture this. Now, the map of California, you guys, go back to the map of California. It shows the shape of current Israel. Look at the yellow. And the yellow, the darker yellow, is Israel proper today. Over on the far left, you see a light tan. That would be the Gaza Strip. And then the center, on the right-hand side, that would be called the West Bank. That's property that's been taken away from Israel. Now, when that 6-day war happened, they whooped the fire out of everybody, but still, little by little, it was parted out. That nation was taken away, this piece and this piece. And it was done 2,000 years ago as well. God doesn't ever forget. God doesn't change his mind. But I want you to notice, if you have a Bible, look at Joel chapter 2. And Joel chapter 3. And look at one verse, and we got to stop. Joel chapter 3, verse 2. I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage. He's talking about down the road, historically, what's going to happen. Whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. You know, notice whose land it is? It's God's land. But they parted it. Take this part here, that part there, take this part there, take that part there. God knew long before any of this ever happened. God knew they were going to be robbed. God knew, and from the Holocaust, all the stories, all the tragedies, God knows. And the history could have been changed had they walked with God. But they didn't. But in God's wonderful love and mercy, he still keeps these things straight. And God knows what he's doing. And you and I can trust him, and we can lean on him. And we don't. You know, we only lean on him when it's easy. But we've got a great God. Now this land, we're going to talk more about the land and in the weeks to come. But God knew they were going to be scattered. God knew the land was going to be parted out. And it's not fair, and it's so wrong. But anyway, it's all right. God's big, and God is in charge. All right? So I want to pass out something real quick here. Just to take a moment tonight. So if I get a couple of you ushers or people who are almost ushers. All right, somebody thinking they might be able to help us here. Maybe give each guy one of those. This is just a 3-minute quick meeting here tonight, and just want to let you know where we are with things. And if you want to slip out, you're welcome to